The chief spoke this morning about our communities possibly doing some needs assessments within the next year or so. So I think it's wonderful that your topic is going to touch on this, and hopefully this will be some good information for our communities to use when doing their needs assessment. I'm going to turn it over to you now, Lindi.
Thank you so much, Tammy. Tammy, you are just awesome, and I'm so glad to have a friendly face along with this session, our last session of the day. So as Tammy said, I'm Lindi Conover, your friendly neighborhood grant writer. I'm pleased to be here with you all today. And I am the founder of the Nonprofit Growth Academy, where I teach passionate leaders of people-powered organizations, coalitions, grassroots organizations, how to get more grant dollars in the door so they can grow their organizations and make a bigger impact in their corner of the world. So this afternoon, it's evening here, maybe afternoon out west, I'm going to talk with you a little bit about the community needs assessment. What the heck these things are, why they're important for your organization, and how they can help you get more grant dollars. Perhaps more importantly, though, this is also going to help you understand how to go about doing one in your community and allowing it to help your organization kind of plan for the future and what you can do in your communities more effectively. So I do a couple of things. I was inspired to do this particular topic because one of our at-large advisory council members, Dr. Wade McAllister, had attended, I can't remember if it was, I think it might have actually been conference last year, and or maybe it was one of our monthly capacity building meetings. And he said, well, hey, I'd really like to learn more about community needs assessments. And I thought, well, hey, that's actually a really great topic to cover. So I'm really pleased to be able to do that today. Some of what we're going to be talking about is pretty broad, but I hope that it can help you kind of see at least how to start one, sort of the things that you would be looking for. And as Tammy said today, Chief Hoskin, encouraged the community members to do needs assessments throughout their communities, whether you're on the res or at large. This is something that can really help you understand how your organization can be more effective in your community, however that's defined. So if you've been in my presentations before, you know that I like to keep them fairly interactive. I think that's just the best way to keep people engaged, but it also helps you learn from your peers. And this gives you a chance to ask me questions, anything that isn't clear or things that you might be interested in learning more about. It helps me to provide better content for y'all throughout the year. So I've got several different screens up. I'm going to be kind of toggling between all of them. If we have any technical difficulties, I just appreciate everybody's patience. Even though we're, 2.5 years into this thing, and the world is all gone virtual, things still happen. So thanks so much for any patience that I might be borrowing from you today. So again, with that said, please use the chat, the Q&A, ask questions. If it's a really great question, or we need to have you give some more detail, please feel free, we'll take you off mute and you can ask the question then. I may also be pausing for a minute throughout this presentation just to give you a chance to answer some of the questions that I have here that might help you start thinking about your own community needs assessment. So be sure to have grab a pen, be sure to have a piece of paper with you so you can start taking notes as we're going through this. We do have a lot to cover in this hour, and I always have to rush through at the end because I spend a lot of time at the beginning trying to pace myself out a little bit better this time. Let's just go ahead and jump in and get started. And all right, so here's what we're going to be covering today. What is the community needs assessment? Why it's important? How it benefits your organization, like how you can use the things that you might be doing throughout your community needs assessment process to address, plan your organization so you can address the needs for your community. And of course, some basic elements for conducting a community needs assessment in your area. So first things first, what is a community needs assessment? Essentially, at the end of the day, a community assessment needs assessment, or I'm going to maybe refer to it as a CNA or an assessment, just because that is a long title. A CNA is really examining what currently exists for your community versus what should exist. And it's identifying some of those gaps between the assets and resources that are available, and what is it that's missing, is needed to serve your community. So it's pretty simple, concept. It's just here's where we are, here's what needs to happen, and here are the missing pieces. And it's in those missing pieces, in between those two things, that maybe your organization would be able to fill the needs. So a community needs assessment is both a process and a deliverable. So the CNA process helps you to get to know your community. It's people, the organizations that exist, what's important to the people you hope to serve and the people who are serving them already. But it also helps you to understand your own organization a little bit better. And we'll talk about both of these things throughout the course of this presentation. The CNA is also a deliverable. It's usually presents its results in a written format, sort of a report style. And it's a document that helps the organization's leadership understand what the community's greatest needs are, and also to kind of guide your organization on how it will respond to these needs and fill these gaps. In essence, it helps you to understand the impact that you'll be able to have on your community through your organization's amazing work. So the CNA is important because it's going to help you get clearer about the purpose of your organization and how it helps the community. Essentially, community needs assessments are a tool. Helps you to get that clarity about your organization's purpose. It helps you to identify very specifically who you need to serve or who you plan to serve, why you serve them, how you serve them. So those would be like the services, the programs, the projects that you do for them. And it also helps you to plan for your organization's success. Again, all of this is leading to you making a greater impact in your corner of the world. Let's see here. Here are some of the things that it will help you to do. Actually, I'm sorry. Through the process of doing a CNA, you're going to get clear about who it is that you serve, because you have to ask those questions in the preparation of doing the CNA. It'll help you understand why you serve them, because as you're having conversations with people and you're making observations about your community, you're going to get a better understanding of why it is that your organization should exist in the first place to help them. And you'll also begin to see the specific ways in how you will serve them. So it really helps you to understand, like, if these are all the things that everybody else is doing, here's our unique edge and how we can fill this gap in our community. Again, that relates to the projects, the programs, and the services that you would provide through your organization. So the CNA process, again, it kind of forces you to get clear about all of these things, which ultimately leads to better outcomes. Now, I want to be clear that I'm sure that most of the reason that the folks who are in this session are here because they are thinking about maybe doing a community needs assessment in their community related to their CCO affiliated community organization. With that being, so I'm kind of working from that perspective that maybe that's how you're going to take this information. At the same time, though, community needs assessments can be conducted across lots of different industries for lots of different purposes. So we're kind of going to be touching on a few of those things as well, just to give you some, experience from on the ground, the things that I've done and how we've used this information. But you can use these same basic principles for any of the kind of work that you're doing. If you were in my grant writing session earlier today, same concept. These are going to be broad statements that can be kind of plugged in different ways. But I hope to speak from it so it's really useful for you in your CCO organization. So here are some of the things that the CNA is going to do. In the process of conducting your assessment, you're going to identify people in your community that are stakeholders, folks that might be doing similar work or work that can help what you're doing. So it requires you to identify these individuals, these organizations, other agencies or coalitions, and build relationships with those stakeholders. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later on, but it's important to understand that through conducting this thing, through just the process of doing a community needs assessment, you're already building your network. So you can think of this not just as sort of like a required element of developing, the deliverable, this written report, but really as a marketing and outreach tool as well. And because you're going to be working through identifying the needs that exist in your community, you're necessarily going to start planning out the different ways that your organization can start to fill these needs based on the strengths and assets of your own organization and the people inside of it. So when you're out talking to folks about the work that they're doing, you're going to find out what services, projects, programs, etc., that they're addressing through their work. And so this serves to make sure that there's sort of no duplication of services, but rather that you're creating synergy and building partnerships. So for example, maybe there's an organization out there that addresses gaps in early elementary literacy, and they do this through free after-school tutoring. Now, let's say your organization decides that they also want to address gaps in educational outcomes. And by going through the CNA process and talking to other service providers that teach the skills gaps in early elementary, you realize that there isn't anyone out there in your community addressing similar gaps for early elementary students in math or science. So maybe there's reading and writing, but there's nobody who's addressing math and science skills. So rather than creating another after-school program that's related to reading, you decide to start an after-school math program to fill the gaps in your community. So by partnering with this other organization, you find that you can use the same facility. For example, this is a very practical example of what might happen as you're doing this. You might find that this other organization, for whatever reason, they already have to rent out this space, for the same amount of time, and it's going to cost the same. So they say, hey, instead of you having to go rent a separate space and hold your after school tutoring programs there, just hold it with us, and then you won't have to pay rent. So those are the kinds of very practical benefits of not duplicating your services, but creating that synergy and partnership that comes out of the process of doing a CNA. And because I am the friendly neighborhood grant writer, my mind is always going back to how can we get more grant dollars in the door? So when I'm working on a CNA, part of what is going on in the back of my mind, or when I'm teaching nonprofit leaders how to develop one or do one, I'm always thinking about the benefits of the CNA when it comes time to apply for grants. So when funders are making decisions about how they want to give away their money, they want to make sure that the recipients of those dollars are going to use them responsibly in a way that it's really going to make an impact on the community. So you increase your legitimacy as an organization by just virtue of doing one of these things, by having one of these things, by letting it guide the things that your organization is going to do. Because you're really, demonstrating to the funder by conducting one of these things that you understand the community's assets that already exist, that you're plugged into them, but that you also understand the specific gaps and how you got to those gaps. And the CNA process, because of what you're doing, will ultimately lead you to plan out the great projects and programs and services that you're going to offer. So in the one of the things that I just talked about is duplicating services and the synergistic partnerships, that through the CNA you are necessarily kind of making sure that you're not going to do the exact same thing or replicate something that's already out there, but instead create those partnerships. So at this point in my career, I have read through hundreds of grant applications and prepared just as many successful grant applications. And I can tell you from experience that it is very common for funders to ask you to compare and contrast what it is that your organization does with other organizations in the community. That question might come up as, what, very simply, what are other organizations in your community doing to address this issue? And how is your organization different or unique? Or even more directly, they might just ask you, how is your organization ensuring that you're not duplicating services? So once you've gone through the process of the community needs assessment, you're not going to have to guess at that answer or try to fluff up something out of nothing. You're already going to be able to state what the answer is with great confidence. And because you will also have gone through this process and started thinking about plugging in those elements into what you're doing, it's going to prepare you just more holistically to sit down at any grant application that you might have in front of you and be able to answer those questions with just absolute confidence, because you know what you're talking about. If you were in my session earlier, I used the example of your favorite movie. Like what I asked, and so if you went through this earlier, I apologize, but to those who are hearing this for the first time, I want you to think for just a second about what your favorite movie is, and think about the opening scene, the score, that the sounds that the music that's playing or what's happening on screen. And if I were to ask you to write about that, you would probably be able to do it. But if I were to ask you to describe the opening scene to Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, if that's not your favorite movie, or if you're not familiar with that movie, or maybe you've seen it and you've kind of forgotten about it, you're not going to be able to describe that very well. And so that's that sort of familiarity. When you're familiar with something, you're a lot more confident about writing about it, about talking about it, describing it. And so that whole concept of just being familiar with your community, so that you can talk about it and address these things through grant applications or whatever it might be, you're going to get that familiarity by conducting a community needs assessment. So one more reason that these really help with grant applications, and again, this is just where my mind is always kind of going to, because I want organizations to be successful in this way. Funders are always asking organizations to describe the partnerships that they have within their communities to achieve their goals. So some funding opportunities even require you to demonstrate these partnerships. And if they don't require it as a prerequisite for getting funding, at the very least, they're going to award you more points for demonstrating those strong partnerships throughout the community. And again, the CNA process requires you to get to know leaders from other organizations, start to plug into the work that they're doing, and become a part of that network, to really be a catalyst for it and propel the good work that's happening in your community. So those are just a few of the practical benefits of conducting a CNA as it relates to kind of how you get plugged into the community and how it might benefit you in the long term with your grant applications, should you approach that later on. So now you're like, okay, this is all great, Lindi. I believe you. They're fantastic. Let's do it. Tell me how to do one. All right. So that is great. I don't yet see any questions in the Q&A, and I don't see anything in the chat, which is fine. But I would like to just, again, encourage anybody to drop some questions in there. Maybe think about, if you don't mind, or you're interested in this, answering this question, it would be awesome to have you tell me about some of the questions that you might have about your own community. Where are you coming from? What are some of the things that you think maybe, hey, maybe our CCO organization could address this issue, or maybe we could, we see sort of this basic topic, this thing out there in our community that needs to be addressed. I'd love for you to pop some of those in the chat. I know it's late in the day, we're towards the end of the session, and but this is what is going to make this really helpful for everybody. Joanne has a question. She pops it in the Q&A, and she says, what happens when you don't get a response from at-large community members? So I think probably, Joanne, what you're talking about is like if you're out there trying to conduct a CNA, one of the tools that you can use is like a survey, or maybe doing interviews with those folks. And so I think Joanne is probably talking about what happens when you reach out, you get crickets, you get silence. That's a great question. And I'm going to make a little note to myself to come back to that, because I do want to answer it when we get to that point. So great, Joanne. I'm just going to say crickets with a survey, and we'll come back to that one later. But please, as we're going through this, drop your questions in there. And if like this one, we are going to get to it, I'll let you know, and then try to address that as I'm describing that in the course of the session. So here are some basic elements, some things some sort of starting points that you can do with your community needs assessment. First, I want, you got to get clear on the purpose of the assessment. We need to figure out, exactly what it is that we're trying to understand better about our community, so that we can plan the assessment better. So let me use an example to illustrate, a couple of examples. So I'm currently conducting a community needs assessment with a municipality here in my home state of Indiana. There's the city's local community development department wants to understand how they can best allocate their limited resources to address the most pressing needs of the community, the needs that specifically emerged in response to the pandemic over the past couple of years. So the purpose or the outcome of this community needs assessment for the city of Anderson is going to help the department make decisions about how it's going to spend its money, how it's going to allocate these funds that they receive, and with a particular eye towards COVID recovery. So the focus of this community needs assessment is going to be on those elements and those sectors of the city that are related to community and economic development, because those are the answers that we're trying, those are the questions that we're trying to answer. So things like economic development, housing, jobs, education, transportation, the provision of healthcare services to some degree. So this is still pretty broad, but at least we know we're kind of going in this sort of basic community development, economic development realm. And so let me use another example to illustrate here. Another CNA that I worked on was a little bit more specific. This particular coalition wanted to understand the ways that the pandemic, again, impacted specifically individuals who were experiencing homelessness and the services that they access. So how did the pandemic impact their ability to find emergency shelter and get the services that they needed? This is getting a little bit more specific. So we're specifically looking at individuals experiencing homelessness and sort of answering two questions. How did this impact your ability to find shelter, and how did it impact your ability to get services? So getting clear, as you can see, kind of clear on the purpose of this. What is it that what's the outcome? I imagine that like for your community organizations, and maybe some of you are trying to figure out, how can we provide less of like a social service, more of like a humanities type programming. What can we do for, the Cherokee community living in, not St. Louis, Kansas City, Missouri, or Washington, D.C., or even Bartlesville. How can this organization contribute to contribute meaningfully by bringing Cherokee culture and values to the community? And so that kind of gives you a direction. You want sort of a direction to go, where in these examples that I was giving you about community economic development or homelessness services, is very different than a community needs assessment that I've conducted about public art displays in rural Indiana. You're going to be looking for very different things, and the outcomes of the CNA are going to be very different. So you really want to you're not going to be able to get out of the gate like super specific probably, but you want to know kind of the general direction that you're going. And here are some of the questions that you might be able to ask yourself, ask your organization. So what service area generally are we trying to address? Is it healthcare? Is it, Cherokee programming, Cherokee culture values? Is it art? Is it education? Is it nutrition? Or maybe you just don't know and you kind of want to get a broad idea of what's happening in the community. But I think having a general idea of kind of where you're heading and how you might kind of having a tentative idea of how your organization might be able to approach some gaps is a helpful place to start. So you want to also think about the intended outcome. Again, like, what are we going to be doing with this information? Is this going to be a planning tool for our organization? It will become a planning tool for your organization, but if that's specifically what we're trying to do, that's a little bit different than if we're, trying to answer a specific question, as in the example of homelessness. We had these two specific questions that we were trying to ask. So the other important thing that you do sort of out of the gate, besides understanding your purpose of the CNA, is to define community. So I know that oftentimes when we say community, especially in the context of Cherokee at-large organizations, community, we automatically think geographic community. In the case of the city that I was doing the community economic development CNA for, it was a geographic community. We're talking about the city of Anderson, Indiana, where some of our communities might be defined differently, like they might be around an affinity or some sort of identity or a common purpose. So like an affinity might be, or identity might be the LGBTQ community. So they're not always only geographically defined. This is probably going to be important for some of the at-large organizations and some of the on-res organizations as well, if you're wanting to specifically serve either Cherokees or individuals who are native members of another tribe, but still need, some connection to culture, language, those sorts of things. So, and language itself is another community identifier. So, we talk about the Cherokee first language speakers. Cherokee speakers are their own sort of community that may or may not be geographically defined. So sometimes these things can be both, like in the case of the homelessness CNA that I've done. We're looking at people who are experiencing homelessness in Northeast Oklahoma. So it's sort of both. So you just want to get clear about who it is that you think you're trying to serve here. Defining community and who it is that you're going to, that you want to serve. And again, this will end up translating into so many different pieces of your organization and what you do. And it kind of gives you an anchor through all the programming that you begin to offer, because you go, these are the people that we're trying to serve. We're not trying to serve baby goats in pajamas, even though that's really cute. That's outside of the scope of what it is that we're doing. So this is really about, the scope of your CNA, the purpose and the community. These are actually these two foundational elements there. So now that you have generally identified, an idea of the purpose or the intended outcome of your CNA and the community that you're hoping to serve, it's time to start planning. Now, the two things that we just talked about, purpose and community, you're allowed to figure these things out with other people in your organization. It's not just something that, Brittany, you have to come up with all by yourself, or Emily, you have to figure this out all on your own. My suggestion is probably to start with the core leadership of your organization. Knowing, sitting, and usually that looks like sitting down at a Zoom screen with 3 or 4 other individuals who are leaders of your organization, or maybe meeting for lunch, and just kind of generally sort of tentatively outlining these things and writing it down on paper. I always find that's really helpful, or starting a Google Doc, so that you have a momentum and you have somewhere to start. Then you want to understand who all is going to be involved with the interview and research process, because a lot of actually conducting the CNA is going to be individuals within your organization sitting down and talking to other stakeholders. So whether that's leaders of other organizations, or maybe your local policymakers, whether that's the mayor, the city council, leaders of other community organizations, those sorts of people. It's going to be talking and getting information, sort of doing snowball, interviews. So, hey, thank you so much for sitting down and talking to me about this. Can you give me the names of 2 or 3 other individuals who might be able to help fill in some of these gaps? So you want to make it clear as you're planning your CNA who from within your own organization is going to be doing those interviews, and also identifying who is capable of doing some more of like the hard data research, if that's something that's appropriate for your CNA. So you'll figure that out by asking, kind of sitting down, just sort of basically going, what data do you need? And leveraging your existing network with that. Now, I want to be clear that this is sort of an iterative process. So when you sit down that first meeting, it's going to feel a little unstructured because you're kind of just starting down the path and you're not really sure. But then you can stop. You're going to get a couple steps, then you're going to stop, and then you're going to say, okay, now we're starting to see these trends and these patterns. We need to revisit and get maybe a little bit more specific. Find out where some of our the gaps in our own understanding of this community are starting to show up. So I just, I want to make it very clear that sometimes as you're going through this process, it's not just going to be like a 1-for-1, like we start and we stop. It's sort of a spiraling thing where you're like, okay, we're starting here. We kind of have this idea. We get a little bit more specific, We find out more data, and you start. It's kind of like a puzzle like that. So again, these are just some questions to get you started on this as you're thinking about this. And if you have any, if you as a representative of your organization would like to share what you guys might be working on, or some thoughts that you as a leader have about your organization, please put it in the chat. Again, I think that's always a fun way to do these. And if you guys were all sitting in a room with me, I'd be picking people out and asking them questions, but it's not as easy to do this way. So you might ask what data it is that you need. And I have here, leverage your existing network. So for example, if I was doing a community needs assessment about domestic violence shelters and needs in my community, I would start by asking some folks I know that work at the victim advocacy office at the prosecutor's office, just because I happen to know those individuals. So that's really how this starts. Sometimes we think about organizations as being these like sort of entities out on their own, but we have to remember that at the end of the day, like organizations are just people being organized with their work. And so it comes back to people. So you probably know more about your community, or who to reach out to find out more about your community than maybe you think you do. So that just is, you and the, 3 or 4 other individuals writing down a list of, here are people that I know that might be able to help answer some of these questions. Or, if I had a question about healthcare in the city of Anderson, my sister-in-law works in the ICU at the hospital. So I might say, hey, who do you know that's on, such and such board or committee that I might be able to talk to about, finding out this specific piece of information. So leverage the network that you already have. You probably have more than you think you do. As you're planning, you also want to be sure to create a timeline and expectations. This is something that can just kind of help you get momentum, keep the momentum, keep going with it. I think one of the unfortunate things that I run into sometimes in people-powered organizations is that, if we're working with volunteers, we think, I can't really ask them to do something, or I can't hold them accountable because they're volunteer. Well, sure, they're volunteering their time, and that is valuable. But there's also, a degree of accountability. So if somebody says, like, I'm going to do this, set reasonable expectations for following through on that. And if you're finding that somebody's just, not able to keep up, that, something personal happens to, they get COVID for a week or something like that, obviously you want to be, provide grace in that space. But, it's okay to say, hey, we, expect you to do that, and follow through with it. I know working with lots of community organizations, the kind of people who tend to gravitate towards this kind of work are very dependable, committed, dedicated people who do follow through. But I just wanted to make that statement that it's okay to make sure that you're, asking folks to follow through on their own responsibilities. Again, making a list of stakeholders is very important in this planning process. Who do we know that might be able to help us understand everything that's going on in the community in the particular sort of subject area that we're interested in addressing? And then sit down and just write your questions. What is it that we need to know? What is it that we need to learn about? And who? Just begin formulating questions. And, I think a good place to start is maybe with like 6 to 10 questions that you can, specific questions that you might want to ask somebody. Now, every single time if you can't tell, I'm a bit of an extrovert, a little bit chatty sometimes. And so I don't have a hard time when I'm interviewing somebody kind of going down a rabbit hole, or knowing how to ask the right follow-up questions. And this is something that you'll get better at as you do more and more interviews to conduct your CNA. So maybe just as sort of like a tools from the trade, start with folks that you're pretty comfortable with, so that if you kind of find yourself fumbling over a question or something like that, there's a little bit more forgiveness or grace there. As opposed to like starting with your state senator, they might just be like, what? But you'll get a feel for how people are going to respond even after 3 or 4 interviews. You don't want to just assume what they're going to say, because that's not the point of this. The point is to get more sort of objective information without a filter. But you'll begin to see those trends emerge pretty quickly. And you'll turn some of those things into your key findings as you write them down. So one of the things that I tend to do when I'm doing an interview, I ask folks, I email them or I call them. I try to email them first to set up a time. And whether we do it over Zoom or we meet in person or phone, I usually let them decide, but I give a couple of times that I would be available, and ask that they let me know when they might be available for this call. And I let them know I have 8 questions for you. And generally here's what they're about. I might not give them the exact questions unless there's something very specific that I'm looking for from this very specific person. But just generally say, hi, I'm working on a community needs assessment and we're interested in learning more about, healthcare services in the city of Anderson, and would just like to talk to you about your experiences. And so then they will tell me how they prefer to have that call, whether it's a call, Zoom, or in person. And then you go prepared with your questions, and you can take notes. I have to take notes. I would forget everything if I didn't. And the great thing about taking notes then is that when I am done with the interview, I go straight to my computer and I start to type them in. And I just sort of pick out the most important pieces of the interview, the things that I found out. And the reason that you can do this is because that makes it really easy to begin to start to identify those trends. And like I said, you'll start to see those after just a couple, 2 or 3, maybe even 4 of those interviews. You're going to start to pick out these things. Okay, this is what I'm hearing our community members, the folks who are in the know about this, say over and over and over again. So that was just a little bit of like how to generate the responses when you're talking about specifically interviewing stakeholders. Now I do want to just pause here and answer the question that we had earlier about what happens when you try to contact folks and you get crickets and you don't hear anything back. I mean, I know I see Alicia does have a question there, and this is a great question, and we're actually going to cover that later. So she has a question about, is there a general template for creating questions for the CNA? So I'm going to write that down and I'm going to put it in the parking lot because that's a great question. But let me pop back to and we're going to cover it here in just a few minutes. But let me pop back to the crickets question. I keep calling it the crickets question. So you send out a survey to folks and you get nothing. My experience with this is that you need to sort of incentivize people to complete the survey or give you 30 minutes of their time to do the interview. And if you just sort of blankly send out an email that says, hey, we need your help, please fill out the survey, and it's not personalized, or there's not really any sort of purpose, you don't explain to them why this is so important, they're not going to do it. The chances that they're going to do it are very, very low. And if you just ask them once, that's probably not going to happen either. I think maybe some ideas, I'm not sure that the individual who asked that was Joanne. Joanne had the question. Joanne, some things you might think about doing are, if there's somebody in your organization that is an artist or could, maybe make something or provide a service, like maybe you have an attorney or something like that on your that sits on your board that would be willing to, give you a 30-minute free consultation for something, or incentivizing people to fill that survey out. Like, hey, if you fill out this survey, you have a chance to, meet with the attorney to talk about something maybe that you need to talk about, or some other service that they might need. Or if you fill this out, you're going to be entered into a drawing to win this beautiful basket that so-and-so made, or win a cash prize, or, a gift card to Sonic, or whatever it might be. Incentivizing folks to participate is one good strategy. Asking them to do it multiple times is necessary. There's that old saying that, like, it takes 7 contacts for something to get through to someone. And so, posting something on your Facebook page one time is not going to do it. And there's algorithms, that would explain why not everyone's going to see it. Sending out one email might not work, even if that email is personalized. I mean, there have been individuals that I've had to reach out to in the process of doing a CNA, 2, 3, 4 times before they finally got back to me, and I was able to make contact with them if I was going after a specific individual to set up an interview. And that's a little bit different than a survey. So the surveys are like, we need lots of data, and we're gonna, give you a chance to win something or earn something if you do this. And I think, again, whether it's you're trying to secure an interview or get survey information from somebody, or have them participate in a focus group or attend a community meeting, whatever that might be, the more specific you can get, and you can tell them why this is important and how their response is going to shape the future of something, that helps people have a little bit of, skin in the game. So those are some things you might think about, Joanne, and I hope that's helpful for you. But those are some things you might think about when you're trying to get lots of, more information in. I also just sort of, this might be sort of silly of me, but it's something that I do, and I think it tends to work. If somebody else is asking me to fill out a survey, I do it. And that might just be me like putting stock in like the cart, like in karma. So I'll say like, okay, this person, needs me to fill out a survey or wants to ask me questions. I'll do it knowing that the universe is gonna, provide that to me when I need it. Again, I don't know if that's something that resonates with you or not, but it definitely, like I said, it's usually worked for me. And so I think just kind of, goodwill towards the universe is a good thing there. All right. You're welcome, Joanne. I hope that was helpful for you. If it didn't answer the question, please let me know. So I want, as you're going through conducting these interviews, getting surveys, holding focus groups, going to community meetings, whatever, these different tactics for accessing the information that you need. There are sort of 4 types of needs that I want to go over here real quick. There's perceived, expressed, absolute, and relative. So we'll go through these. This is just one way for you to start maybe organizing some of the things that you're seeing as you're developing the scene, as you're conducting this, as you're doing the research. Perceived needs are the things that people say like to you through the course of the survey or the interview, that they say, this is what I think needs to happen. This is what I perceive as the problem. This is, just like it sounds, this is a perceived need that the community you might see sort of float to the top. These are the perceptions of the community about what needs to happen. Expressed needs, these are the kinds of things that are, people are already rattling cages about. They're saying, hey, there's, everybody in the town knows that there are terrible potholes in the community, and they've already, you're finding this in letters to the editor. I don't want to give too much credence to complaints on Facebook, so we're not even going to go down that route. But express needs in legitimate avenues of change. So, at a school board meeting or a local town council meeting, there's a legitimate petition circulating or something like that. So those are expressed needs. So as you're getting information, you might say, okay, so what are people saying? What are the things that people are saying, like one-on-one, are perceived needs in the community? And what are we seeing that folks are actually already starting to activate on? So those are those express needs. What are those things people saying in legitimate ways this needs to change? Then there are absolute needs. Absolute needs are the things that we are like baseline needs for what it is that we as humans need to operate, like our norms. So an absolute need is like clean water, food. You almost might be able to say like an absolute need would be something, Alicia, you're very welcome. An absolute need might be students who need, gym shoes when they go back to school, things like that. It's sort of basic needs. And we might find in our community that there's a real problem with something that is an absolute need. And you kind of want to just, put that on there, that might be something that your community is saying, hey, we need this. And I think, especially in communities that maybe, experiencing certain levels of poverty or, under education, those sorts of things, the absolute needs might be what are coming to the top. And then we have relative needs. So this is really context specific. So if you're, there's a city in just north of Indianapolis, about 45 minutes from where I live. And it is like night and day from Stillwell, Oklahoma, if you will. Carmel, Indiana is one of the most affluent cities in the nation. Again, I live far away from it. But they, it just, I'm sure, I mean, not to say that there's nobody struggling with their absolute needs in a city like Carmel. That's just not what's going to float to the top. As you start talking to folks, you're going to find, these sort of the relative needs, like, oh, we need another ballet school for, the students whose parents only make $125,000 a year or something like that. So these are those things that are very relative to the context of what you're researching. So I just wanted to kind of give you some of these categories that that you can start sort of putting your needs in. Now, this isn't the only one. There's a bajillion different ways to organize it. And as we do, I could go a whole day talking about, how to organize this information. I'm happy to do that. If that's something that, after Chief Hoskin announced that we were going to be getting all this money, and one way to know how best to use that money is to conduct a CNA. This might be something that we can all work on together, and I'm happy to provide that service. So again, these are just some ways to start thinking about how to classify the trends that you're seeing. All right, we got 10 minutes left. So we have different ways to collect, we've got qualitative data and quantitative data. I think most people probably know the difference, but quality is sort of like experiential data, the stuff that's a little bit harder to maybe tie a number to. This kind of data is going to come from things like interviews. It's maybe going to come from surveys. So Joanne, we talked about how to get folks to engage with those surveys a little bit more. These are going to be things that come out of your community meetings, your letters to the editor, observations about current events in your community, and any experiences that maybe you have of organizations doing similar work. One way that you can get some of that experience is by volunteering with those organizations, and really finding out, okay, this is what the domestic violence, shelters in our community really experience. You're really like embodying that information. And I think that that's also a good way if you're a new community organization, and maybe an organization sort of at large, is just to start getting plugged in by volunteering with organizations that are already out there in your community, and starting like figure out how you can plug into the things that they're already doing that might add value based on the assets that you have in your organization already. So this is some ways that you can get more data, sort of like the experiential stuff, the stuff you could write about and maybe not so much put numbers to. Now, of course, if you have enough surveys, people are going to be talking about their experiences. It's going to be qualitative stuff that you can ultimately tie numbers to. We had 30 respondents said that they, wanted to see more, moccasin making classes. Like that, is an opinion that's tied to a number of people having that opinion. Now, we also have quantitative data. So this, it's hard to get really specific without knowing like a specific CNA that somebody's trying to do. But it's important for you as someone conducting a CNA to understand what kind of data that you need to find and where to find it. So if you're trying to get like hyper specific or hyper local information, your local agencies are going to be really helpful. So again, that could be, maybe you're going to a hospital and they have some data. They may actually, hospitals, community foundations, other like maybe chambers of commerce, they may have already done a community needs assessment that fit their needs, and being able to look at those things and see some of the information that they've already collected, they've already gathered, they've already synthesized, that's a good place to start. So that's why I put this here, because I wanted to share that sometimes, there's no reason to reinvent the wheel. Now, you don't want to just take somebody else's data, without citing it or giving them credit for it, but again, they may have had a very different reason to do it. So if you were doing your own community needs assessment, and you're trying to fill artistic needs, and you only look at the hospital's community needs assessment, you're going to get way miscalibrated because they're focused on healthcare and you're focused on, arts and humanities programming. So again, just be careful about, just looking at, relying too much on one data set. But some of these things might already be out there in your community. And as long as you're, doing it holistically, then it's okay to use it to enhance what you're already trying to do. Census data can be helpful if it can be helpful. It's also can be really difficult to access it, and there's a lot of barriers to people understanding how to use it. But if you're trying to get just some like basic information about demographics, going to the census data can help. I always just caution you to use reputable sources like government or university research, not these silly other things out there. I think we're in a world right now where people know maybe a little bit. We're getting better at siphoning out the bad stuff from the good stuff. So you just want to make sure that the information again that you're getting is reputable. There's lots of graphs and maps out there that can help with the visual representation of the information. I happen to be kind of a map nerd myself. I just love looking at them and seeing the different ways that you can chunk up data and represent it on a map. And so if you know someone who's really into maps, that's a good person to have when you're doing a CNA. So then you've got all this data, you're taking notes, you started, looking at the trends, you're pulling those things out, you're classifying as these different kinds of needs that you're seeing in the community. And then it's not a bad idea to kind of have a final report. The report should fit your needs though. So in that way, there's not a specific template for the report. And so this is part of the question that I think Alicia had. Is there a template for questions? So your question, Alicia, was about, is there a specific template for community needs assessment questions? No, there's not, which is both good and bad, because then, the good side of it is like, I don't have a template, so I have to create something out of nothing. But that's where getting really clear on the purpose of your of what it is that you're trying to accomplish can help you generate the right questions. And after you do 1 or 2 or 3 interviews, you're going to kind of start to see, hey, you know what? I should have asked this question. And so you'll add it in there. Again, this is an iterative process. It's not just like, okay, I got to get it right out of the gate. It's okay if you don't, and you probably won't. I mean, everyone I've gone, usually the first 2 or 3 people that I interview, I have to go back to at the end and ask them more follow-up questions, which is another reason why you want to start with people who are already going to give you a little bit of grace when you flub through your first interviews or two. And they're usually very happy. And by the time you're kind of like, hey, I've got all this other data and I'm coming back to ask you more, they might be really excited to kind of understand what all you've learned along the process. So there's not really a template for questions for you to use. You get to create that. So again, there's, it's a good thing because you get to make it hyper tailored to what you're trying to figure out for your community and your organization. But on the other hand, then you have to figure out exactly what it is that you're trying to accomplish with your community and your organization. So it's a double-sided coin there, and they all are. And in the same way, there's not necessarily a template for the report. There are templates out there. There's not like a universal, this is what a community needs assessment needs to look like. Now, sometimes the CNAs that I have been involved with, there is a very specific template, but those are usually because some state agency or some federal agency is requiring that you fill out this template exactly how they want addressing these things. When we're doing stuff with our own community organizations, it's much less formal. It's a lot more informal about that. It can include anything that's really relevant to you. So it's a combination of those visual elements like graphs, maps, etc., bullet points, narratives, like however you and your organization finds that it's most helpful to represent that information is fine. Again, if this is something that your organization wants to do, just reach out to us at CCO. I'm happy to help with that. It's something that I love doing, is helping organizations like get really clear about, what does the community needs, then how do we figure out how do we get there? This last little point here, mind map if you need to. This is, I'm a very visual person. And so sometimes I'll just start writing, like get a big piece of paper and just start writing things down. And then, oh, this connects to this is how this connects to that. And out of that, something good comes. And talking it through with other members of your organization can really help. Some elements, and I'll just go through these very quickly. I know we're getting down to the wire here. When you create the report, you definitely want us to describe your methodology. So like, what did we do and how did we do it to get here? So if there were any pieces or that maybe look like a template of this, these would be some of the elements that you would want to make sure are in that. So how did we arrive at this? What are some of the limitations of this? Like, what didn't we do? Yeah, we did all this other stuff, but where are our blind spots? Who might not be represented in this and why? Did they not respond? Were we just, not able to find them? That sort of thing. You definitely want to identify those key findings. Hey, this is what our community said they needed. And here's how our organization is positioned to fill those gaps. And that can come from within that own, leveraging your own resources, assets, talents that exist within your organization. And then, and this is where it gets really fun, so we move out of the sort of the community needs assessment into our own strategic plan for our organization. And this is where we begin to identify how our key findings that we found from doing this overlap with our organization's current resources, capacity, and passion. And that's where we get the next step, which is like, how do we move into the plan? How do we take this great information that we found and plan how our organizations are going to move forward and address those needs within our own community? Then, of course, you're able to share those results. Who else needs to know this information? Your board, your leadership, and your organization is definitely one. Other stakeholders, the folks that helped you get this information, those people who contributed, any funding agencies or policymakers that you think that, hey, maybe they don't know this, and I want to share this with them about what's happening in the community. They might be interested in that as well. So I know we are like a minute or two over time, but 7:01. I think I did pretty good, Tammy. It's 7:01 here on the East Coast, or East Coast, Eastern time zone. In any case, I don't see any open questions. I don't see anything in the chat, but I am certainly here and available to answer any questions, should there be any. I hope this was helpful. I was kind of looking to see if Wade was on with us. I don't think that he is, but that's okay. Hopefully he'll catch the replay, because Wade, I did it. We did a session on community assessments and how we conduct them. Alicia, that's really nice. Alicia said thank you for doing this. I'm happy to answer any other questions. And my contact information is in the conference website. And so if you have any questions that you don't want to ask right now, or you think about something at 3 o'clock in the morning, feel free to email me there. Let's see. Emily asks, would a CNA include concrete goals and solutions, or would that be saved for a subsequent strategic plan? Emily, that's a great question. I think that you might be able to sort of gesture at them through your CNA, where the CNA is really an assessment. Hey, this is what our community needs. This is what, we're assessing what we need. And there's a little bit of that piece where you can say, so again, like that, this last slide that I had up here, let's see if I can do this again quickly. The assessment does identify how your key findings overlap with your organization's current resources, capacity, and passion. And so there's, you're kind of like, maybe it's like a quick, like, hey, here's what we're going to do to address it. Now, what I would do if I was working with an organization is probably say, hey, great, that's the needs assessment. We've kind of very tentatively said these are the 3 or 4 things or areas that we can address, or the programs, projects, or services that we can offer to fill those needs, and then take it into a strategic plan that gets really, really specific about those things. It's a little bit less of, at that point, it becomes a little bit less about gathering more information. You've already done all that. Through the CNA, you might need some more information, but the strategic plan is really like, okay, now, where's the rubber meet the road? How are we going to address these issues? That's an excellent question. I love that question. I've got a couple more here. Tammy, if I'm good to keep answering.
You're good. Keep going.
Alicia also asked if I could put my address, my email address in here. So I popped that in the chat. It's just lindy@epcollaboration.com. Patrick, he has a question here. Are there specific resources for making communities energy independent? Patrick, that's a huge question. It's a big answer. Let me say that. It's a great question. Yes, is the short answer. I'm not an expert in energy independence by any means. But this is a really good, this would be a really good example. This would be something that would be really fun to sort of tease out. But I would start with the, if I was, that's a really big question, Patrick. It's a good one. Yes, there are resources out there. I would start probably with some of those like government or university agencies that have done research in energy independence. You might also, I do know very superficially that co-ops, like energy co-ops, are doing really great work in making communities energy independent. And so that might be a good place to look to, just like co-ops and doing energy stuff. And then just really looking at, what are the goals? Like, what is it that you want to do with your community? How do you want to become energy independent? And looking at how some of the other movers and shakers in the community might also have that same goal. And that's where, okay, so, our organization wants to focus on energy independence. And so does this major funder or, with authority, whether it's the city council, the town council, or the state or whatever, they want to do that. And that's where you can start to like overlap the work that you do with some of what's already happening and, create the bigger waves so that you can make a bigger impact in your corner of the world. Patrick, I hope that was a helpful answer. It's a really big question, and it's a little bit out of my wheelhouse, but those would be some suggestions that I might have for where to start. Oh, you're on mute.
Whoops.
There you go.
Thank you so much, Lindy. This has been a wonderful presentation. There was a question asked of me about going to Kansas again. We barely missed that date this year due to COVID shutdown, but hopefully we will be back out there next year, same time. So we're excited to be going back again to see our large groups and look forward to seeing you all soon. Lindy, thank you so much. And I'm sure we'll have many, many more questions for you regarding needs assessments in the near future.
Great.
I hope everyone can join us for the banquet at 7 o'clock this evening. Just gonna close out at that time. So Lindy, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for being here and sticking around. Email me with questions.